The sun sat low over the Montana ridge, painting the grassland the color of old copper. Josiah Flint watched his grandson pack a trunk that might carry him all the way to Yale, and something in the way the boy folded each shirt made the old man's chest tighten. Not from pride, from recognition. Caleb moved like someone trying to convince himself of a decision already made. 18 years old, graduating top of his class from the county school acceptance letter from Yale, sitting on the kitchen table like a judgment. The boy wanted to go. That much was clear. But wanting and choosing were different animals, and Josiah had learned that lesson the hard way. He cleared his throat. The sound carried across the porch where he sat in the same chair he'd occupied for 30 years. Caleb looked up, holding a pair of trousers halfway into the trunk. "Sit down, boy," Josiah said. His voice had that rough quality age brings, like stones rolled in a creek bed. "Before you go anywhere, there's something you need to hear." Caleb set down the trousers. He'd heard that tone before. It meant a story was coming, and stories from his grandfather weren't the kind you interrupted. The young man walked to the porch and lowered himself onto the top step, facing the old man. "It's about choosing," Josiah said, lighting his pipe with hands that still knew the motion despite the tremor. "And about what happens when you freeze instead." The smoke curled between them. Caleb waited. "Summer of 1876, Josiah began. "I was 45 years old, had been running for 3 years, running from something I'd done, or more accurate, something I hadn't done." He paused, drew on the pipe. "I was the most cowardly man I'd ever known." Caleb's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. "When I finish this story," Josiah continued, "you'll understand why I can't tell you whether to go east or stay west. Can't tell you what to choose." He met his grandson's gaze. "But you'll know this much. When it comes time to stand or run, what you do in that moment matters, and what you do after matters even more." "You ran," Caleb asked quietly. Josiah nodded. "For 3 years, hid in mountains, trapped beaver that weren't worth trapping anymore. Told myself I was building a new life." He knocked ash from his pipe. "Truth was, I was dying slow." "What changed?" "A barn," Josiah said. "A nun tied up inside it, and a choice I couldn't run from anymore." He settled deeper into his chair, gaze drifting toward the horizon where the last light was bleeding out of the sky. "Listen close now. This isn't a story about heroes. It's about a coward who learned to stand still." The old man's eyes went distant, seeing something 40 years gone but never forgotten. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, dropped into that rhythm of memory where past becomes present. "New Mexico Territory, July of 76. Heat that could crack stone. Discovered July 1876, New Mexico Territory." Josiah Flint came down from the mountains on a horse that knew the trail better than he did. 3 years in the high country had taught him how to move quiet, how to trap what needed trapping, how to avoid other men. That last part had been the goal. The beaver were mostly gone anyway, pelts not worth the effort, but a man could live on venison and silence if he tried hard enough. The problem with silence was that it got loud after a while. He'd heard about the mission land from a territorial clerk in Santa Fe. Abandoned church property, cheap as dirt, far enough from anywhere that a man could disappear proper. 30 acres of desert scrub, a house that leaned like it was tired, and a barn that somehow stood straighter than the house did. The whole lot cost him $180, which was most of what he had left after 3 years of not caring about money. The deed sat in his saddlebag next to letters from his dead wife. He hadn't read those letters since she passed, but he carried them the way some men carried whiskey. For the weight, for the reminder that he'd lost the right to comfort. The horse, a gray mare he'd named Abel for no reason he could articulate, snorted when they crested the last rise. Below the mission, spread out like a prayer someone had started and forgotten. Adobe walls bleached white by sun and time. A chapel with half its roof gone. 3 small buildings that might have housed teachers or priests once. And the barn. The barn stood dark red against the pale earth door, slightly ajar, looking more solid than anything else on the property. Josiah studied it from the ridge, something tightening in his chest that felt like warning. Abel shifted under him, ears swiveling forward and back. "Easy," he murmured, more to himself than the horse. He rode down slow. No rush. Rushing was for men with somewhere to be, and he'd spent 3 years practicing the art of having nowhere to go. The yard was dust and rock, a few struggling cottonwoods near what had been a well. The well bucket sat on the ground beside it, rope frayed but serviceable. He dismounted near the house and stood for a moment just listening. Desert quiet, the kind that pressed against your ears. Wind through dry grass. Somewhere distant, a hawk screamed. But underneath that, something else. Something that made Abel sidestep and toss her head. Animals knew before men did. Josiah walked toward the barn with his hand near the knife on his belt. Not from fear, from 3 years of habit, from knowing that the world could turn on you in the space between one breath and the next. The doors groaned when he pulled them wider, old wood protesting hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. Inside, the light fell in strips through gaps in the boards, dust moving through it like something alive and lazy. The smell hit him before his eyes adjusted. Sweat, old rope, fear that had nowhere to go. And underneath that, something sweet and wrong. Like incense in a church nobody tended. He stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust. Hay bales stacked along one wall. A broken wagon wheel, some kind of pulley system hanging from the rafters, rope dangling. And in the far corner, a shape that wasn't quite right. At first, he thought it was rags, cloth piled up and forgotten. Then he saw the foot, bare, pale, unmoving. Josiah didn't run. Every step felt louder than it should, his boots on packed dirt, the barn listening to him, the way buildings did when bad things had happened inside them. He knelt beside the shape and reached out, slowly touched what turned out to be a shoulder. The skin felt cold, not dead cold, but close. Then the shape twitched, just barely, like life hanging on by a thread so thin you could barely see it. His knife came out fast. 3 years in mountains had kept it sharp. He cut the rope around the wrists, first the strands parting clean. The wrists underneath were raw skin rubbed away, in places blood-dried dark. He pulled back the blanket someone had thrown over the shape, and that's when he saw her clear. A woman, young, maybe 30, face bruised, dirt smeared across her cheeks, lips cracked and bleeding. She wore black, not regular black, the kind of black that meant something. He recognized it after a moment, a habit. Torn and filthy, but still recognizable. A nun, her eyes fluttered open. Green, pale green, like glass in an old window. They focused on him for half a second, not quite seeing, not quite blind. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, voice like stones scraping, or a test. Josiah sat back on his heels. "Neither, just passing through." Her mouth moved. It might have been a smile. Hard to tell with lips that broken. "Then God has a sense of humor." She passed out again before he could respond. He checked her breathing, shallow but steady, checked her ankles. Rope burns there too, already cut. Someone had tied her tight and left her to see how long it took. 3 days, judging by the state of her. Maybe 4. Desert heat could kill faster, but the barn had kept her shaded. Barely. Josiah poured water from his canteen onto a cloth and pressed it to her forehead. Her skin was hot, feverish. The water soaked in, darkening the dirt on her face into mud. She didn't wake again. He sat there for a long time, listening to her breathe. The barn was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet. The kind that waited for something. The kind that demanded an answer to a question he didn't want to ask. Who left her here? And more important, were they coming back? Finally he stood, couldn't leave her on the dirt floor. Couldn't leave her inside walls that had held her while she waited to die. He lifted her easy. She weighed nothing, all bone and cloth and stubborn breathing. He carried her outside and laid her on a cot he dragged from the house. The cleanest blanket he owned went over her. It wasn't clean enough. Nothing was. He sat beside her with the shotgun across his knees. Not because he was afraid, because 3 years in mountains taught you that when you found something broken, someone usually came back to make sure it stayed that way. The sun dropped behind the mesa. The sky went orange, then purple, then black. Stars came out thick and bright the way they did in the desert, so many you couldn't name them all if you tried. Josiah kept the lamp burning low. Not for himself, for her. So if she woke up, she'd know she wasn't in the dark anymore. She dreamed. He could tell by the way she moved under the blanket, small movements, her lips forming words he couldn't hear. Once she said something clear. "Forgive them." Her hands clenched, relaxed, clenched again. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just kept the light on. Morning came slow the way it did in the desert. Light before heat, color before detail. He dozed sitting up, the shotgun still across his knees, and he woke to the sound of her breathing changing. Deeper, more regular. Her eyes opened. This time they saw him clear. She didn't scream, didn't flinch, just looked at him the way you might look at something unexpected but not unwelcome. Then her gaze moved to the sky, the stars fading in the growing light, and something in her face loosened. "Still alive," she said. Her voice was rough but stronger. "Or this is a very detailed afterlife." Josiah stood, walked to the well, drew water. He came back with a cup and helped her sit up. She took it with both hands like a child with something precious. Drank slow. Some of it ran down her chin and she didn't care. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. We don't know if whoever did this is coming back." She looked at him, then really looked. Green eyes studying his face like she was reading something written there. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. "What makes you say that?" "Because I am too." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd run in different directions and somehow ended up in the same abandoned mission, with the same understanding between them. Finally, he asked, "How long were you in there?" She thought about it. 3 days, maybe 4. It's hard to tell when. She stopped, swallowed. "When you think every breath might be the last one." "Who did it?" She looked toward the barn, then away. "His name is Wade Caldwell. We were supposed to marry once, a long time ago." Recovery and revelation. The first 2 days Sister Grace Webb could barely stand. Josiah made tea from herbs he'd learned in the mountains, plants the Shoshone had showed him before Sarah died. Yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, things that worked whether you believed in them or not. Grace drank what he gave her and didn't ask questions. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people, when you pulled them half dead from a barn, they wanted to talk, wanted to explain, wanted you to know they weren't the kind of person this happened to. Grace just accepted the tea, the blanket, the cot under the stars, like she'd learned somewhere that fighting took energy you couldn't spare. The second thing he noticed was her hands. They weren't soft, calloused across the palms, dirt under the nails that wouldn't come out because it had been there a long time. Working hands. The hands of someone who knew how to fix a roof or dig a well or hold a child's face steady while you cleaned a cut. The third thing was harder to name. A quality in the way she looked at things. The burned chapel, the dry well, the barn with its door hanging open like a mouth. She looked at them the way you might look at old friends who'd fallen on hard times. With grief, but also with a kind of recognition that said she'd expected this. On the third day she stood, took 3 steps. Her legs shook, but they held. Josiah watched from where he was repairing, a fence post, hammer in hand, not offering to help because he could see she needed to do it alone. "That's enough," he said when she swayed. She nodded and sat back down. That afternoon, while she rested, he walked the property, slow and careful, looking for tracks, signs, anything that said they weren't alone. He found them by the creek, what was left of it. 2 sets of boot prints, recent, maybe yesterday. Heavy boots, the kind men wore when they expected to walk through trouble. Cigarette butts scattered near a rock where someone had sat watching the mission. Turkish tobacco, expensive. He knelt and pressed his fingers into the dirt near the tracks. Still damp underneath where morning dew hadn't dried yet. Whoever they were, they'd been here at dawn, which meant they knew she was alive, knew he'd found her, were waiting to see what he'd do next. When he came back, Grace was sitting on the cot with a cup of water staring at the barn. "You found something," she said. "Tracks, 2 men, they've been watching." She nodded like she'd expected that too. "Cutler and Pike, Wade's men. They coming back." "They will. Wade doesn't leave things unfinished." She looked at him. "You should go. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not, but it's my land now." "That won't matter to him." "It matters to me." Something passed across her face. Not quite surprise, more like recognition. "You're not just running from something. You're running from yourself." Josiah set the hammer down. "Seems to me, sister, you know a lot about running." "I do. That's how I recognize it in others." They didn't talk more that day. But that night, after he'd made beans that burned at the edges and she'd eaten them anyway, Grace told him her story. She was born Grace Eleanor Webb in Virginia, 1846. Her father was a Methodist preacher who taught her Greek and Latin because he believed women had souls worth educating. Her mother was a school teacher who taught her to question everything, especially things that claimed to be certain. Together, they'd raised a daughter who knew the Bible better than most ministers and could argue theology with anyone who tried. When she was 16, her father died. Cholera, fast and ugly. Her mother followed 6 months later. Heart, the doctor said, but Grace knew it was grief dressed up in medical language. At 22, she was alone in the world with an education that made men uncomfortable and a face that made them bolder than they should be. That's when she met Wade Caldwell. He was the son of Robert Caldwell, who owned 40,000 acres from Santa Fe to the Arizona border. Land grants, mining claims, railroad contracts. The kind of wealth that made people nervous when you said no to it. Wade courted her proper, flowers, dinners, talk about building schools on his father's land, maybe even a library. Grace believed him because she wanted to, because after 2 years alone, the idea of belonging somewhere looked like salvation. The engagement lasted 4 months. She discovered what kind of man Wade was on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd ridden out to see the land where they'd build their house, and she found him in the workers' quarters. A man was on the ground not moving. Another man, Polish, still breathing but barely. Wade stood over them with a shovel. "What happened?" she'd asked. Wade turned surprised to see her. "Nothing, just discipline. Tools went missing." The Polish man tried to speak. Bubbles of blood instead of words. Wade hit him again. Not angry, almost bored. That's when Grace understood. The violence wasn't about the tools, it was about power. About a man so used to getting what he wanted that human life had become just another thing he owned. She'd ridden back to town, packed her things, left a letter breaking the engagement, cited irreconcilable differences, which was a polite way of saying she'd seen evil and wouldn't marry it. Wade found her 2 days later. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, just smiled that smile he had. The one that said the world was something he could shape with money and time. "You think you can embarrass me?" he'd asked. "Tell people I'm not good enough for a preacher's daughter. I don't need to tell anyone. Your actions speak clear enough." That's when his smile got thinner. "Walk away if you want, but understand, I don't lose things, especially things that were mine." Grace fled west, changed her name, considered changing her faith, ended up in California where a Catholic mission needed teachers and didn't ask too many questions about Protestant women who knew Latin. She converted because the ritual mattered, the tradition mattered, and because nobody looked for a Methodist girl in a Catholic habit. For 7 years, she taught at Mission San Felipe, Paiute children, mostly some settlers' kids who couldn't read yet. She learned their language, they learned hers. The elders taught her things her education hadn't covered. How to track water underground, which plants healed, which wounds, how to fight with empty hands when fighting was the only option left. She was 30 years old and finally felt safe when Wade found her again. He showed up 4 weeks ago with papers, a land grant from 1798 Spanish Crown seal, validated by the territorial governor. It claimed Mission San Felipe and its 30 acres belonged to Caldwell family holdings. The church's deed had been destroyed in a fire the year before, along with most of the diocese records. And Father Menendez, who'd kept copies, had died of a heart attack in his sleep. Grace knew then. Wade had been planning this for years. The fire, the priest's death, the paperwork that appeared exactly when needed. He was thorough. She'd give him that. "Sign the quitclaim," he'd said, standing in the mission courtyard while children watched from classroom windows. "I'll give you $500 and safe passage to California." "This land feeds 30 children," Grace said. "You can't have it." "I already do. The question is whether you leave walking or you leave some other way." She'd refused. Obviously, she'd spent 7 years building something good, teaching children who needed teaching, creating a place where broken things could heal. She wasn't giving that up because a cruel man knew how to forge documents. Wade came back 3 nights later with Cutler Boyd and Pike Ramsey. Cutler had a scarred face and missing fingers. Pike was young, nervous, following orders because he didn't know how to do anything else. They'd grabbed her after evening prayers, dragged her to the barn, tied her up tight. Wade had leaned close before leaving. "The desert will finish what I started years ago, and this time, you won't embarrass me. You'll just disappear." They'd left her with a blanket against the cold and nothing else. No water, no food, just rope and darkness and the sound of her own breathing getting slower as the days passed. When Grace finished talking, her voice was steady. No tears, no shaking, just facts laid out like stones in a row. Josiah stared at the fire between them, watching flames eat wood and turn it to ash. He was thinking about Tombstone, about another fire, about standing still when he should have moved. I can't let him take this place, Grace said. These children need somewhere to learn, somewhere safe. He'll come back. I know. With more men next time. Probably, Timus. And you want to fight him? Grace looked at him. I want to stand. There's a difference. Josiah recognized that difference. He'd spent 3 years running instead of standing, and it had cost him more than Wade's rope had cost her. Can you teach me to shoot? She asked. He looked at her. Really looked. Saw a woman who'd been left to die and decided death wasn't the end of the conversation. Saw someone who understood that survival without dignity wasn't survival at all. You're a nun, he said. I'm a woman who was left in a barn. The habit doesn't make me helpless. It's not about the habit. You shoot a man, you have to live with it. Can you do that? Can you live with not teaching me and I die anyway? Josiah stood, walked to the shed where he'd stored his gear, came back with a rifle and a box of shells, set up tin cans along the fence rail in the morning light. Start slow, he said. Don't aim. Point. What's the difference? Aiming is thinking. Pointing is knowing. You don't have time to think when trouble comes. Her first 5 shots missed completely. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and she wasn't ready for it. The 6th shot clipped a can. The 7th knocked it clean off the fence. By the 20th shot, she was hitting 3 out of 4. Josiah nodded once. You'll do. Grace lowered the rifle. Well, I have to. He looked toward the horizon where dust devils danced in the afternoon heat. Looked back at her. Probably the bell and the return day 8 came hot and still. The kind of day where the air pressed down like a hand and nothing moved except what had to. Josiah was checking the well rope when he heard it. The bell. There was a bell at the gate, small and iron, hanging from a post. Wind could move it sometimes, but this wasn't wind. This was deliberate. 3 rings evenly spaced. Someone wanted them to know they were coming. Josiah walked to where Grace stood by the house rifle in her hands now, like it belonged there. They looked at each other and didn't need to speak. They both knew what those bells meant. Dust rose from the valley road. 3 riders, slow and confident. The kind of slow that said they weren't worried about what waited for them. The kind of confidence that came from always winning. Grace wrapped her rosary around her left wrist. The beads were wooden, worn smooth from years of prayers. She'd cleaned the ash off them, but you could still see it in the cracks, dark lines like the wood remembered what had been done to it. Whatever happens, she said quietly, don't let him take me alive again. Josiah didn't answer, just checked the shotgun load and waited. The riders took their time, sun behind them so they were hard to see clear. Josiah shaded his eyes and picked out details. The lead rider was heavy-set gray in his beard, sitting his horse like he owned everything the shadow touched. Behind him, 2 others, one with a scarred face, one young and twitchy. Wade Caldwell stopped 20 yards out, looked at the mission at Grace standing on the porch at Josiah beside her. His smile was the kind that didn't reach anywhere that mattered. Grace Eleanor Webb, he called out. You're harder to kill than a cockroach. Grace stepped forward. The rifle was in her hands but not raised. Yet. I'm harder to silence too, Wade. That mouth of yours always was your problem. Wade's eyes shifted to Josiah. And who are you, the new groundskeeper? I'm the man who owns this land. Wade laughed. Actually laughed. Not according to territorial records. He pulled a paper from his saddlebag, waved it. Spanish land grant, validated by the governor himself. This mission, this land, 30 acres of scrub, all Caldwell property. That's a forgery, Grace said. Prove it. Oh, wait, you can't, because the church records burned in that unfortunate fire last year. Wade's smile got wider, and Father Menendez, God rest his soul, isn't available to dispute anything. Grace went still. You killed him. Wade shrugged. Old priests have heart attacks. It happens. Behind him, the scarred man Cutler shifted in his saddle. The young one Pike looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Josiah studied Wade's face. Saw something there he recognized from other men he'd known. Not anger, not even cruelty exactly. Just a kind of emptiness where conscience should be. The look of someone who'd learned early that the world gave you what you took and punished you for hesitating. He'd seen that look in the mirror 3 years ago after Tombstone, before he learned to stop looking. "Here's how this ends," Wade said, leaning forward in his saddle. "Grace, you sign the deed. I give you $500 and a horse. You ride to California and we never see each other again." He paused. "Or we do this the hard way, which I'll be honest, I'm hoping for." Grace's hands tightened on the rifle. "I'd rather burn this place myself than give it to you." "That can be arranged." "Then we've got nothing to talk about." Wade's smile disappeared, just vanished like it had never been there. What was underneath wasn't better. "I gave you mercy once, left you alive in that barn. Don't test me again." "You call that mercy?" Grace's voice rose righteous and hard. 3 days tied in darkness, drinking my own sweat, waiting to die. That's not mercy. That's cowardice dressed up as patience." Silence. Even the wind stopped. Grace took another step forward. "You're not a man, Wade. You're a coward who hides behind lawyers and hired guns. You couldn't face me honestly then, so you burned evidence and killed a priest. You can't face me now, so you brought muscle." Cutler's hand drifted toward his gun. Josiah's voice came out flat. "You draw, you die. Simple as that." Pike's horse sidestepped. The young man's face had gone pale. Wade's jaw clenched. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly," Josiah said. "I've met your kind before." "Then you know how this ends." "Do I, pal?" Cutler drew first. The reckoning, everything happened in the space between heartbeats. Cutler's hand going for his pistol, fingers wrapping around the grip, pulling it clear of the holster. Josiah's shotgun, already moving, already aimed, already too late to stop. The shotgun roared. Cutler's shoulder exploded in red mist and bone. He dropped off his horse like someone cut the strings holding him up, hit the ground and didn't move again. Pike panicked. Drew wildfired without aiming. The bullet hit the porch post 6 inches from Grace's head. Wood splinters and dust. Grace didn't flinch. She fired back her shot high, but close enough that Pike felt the air move near his ear. His horse spooked reared. Pike fell backwards out of the saddle, hit hard rolled. Wade dove off his horse, going for the cover of the water trough. His pistol came out smooth, and he fired at Josiah. The bullet caught dirt near Josiah's boot, jumped up, and drew a line of fire across his ribs. Not deep, but it burned. Grace circled wide the way Josiah had taught her, flanking, making Wade choose which threat to watch. Wade realized too late he was pinned between two shooters with nothing but a water trough for cover. He tried to run, ran toward the barn like instinct pulled him there. Grace moved faster. She'd been waiting days for this moment, and rage made her quick. She caught him at the threshold, same doorway, where he'd left her to die, and she hit him like all her training from the Paiute elders condensed into one movement. They went down together in the dust. Wade clawed at her face, her habit, anything he could reach. "You crazy woman, I should have killed you proper." Grace headbutted him. His nose broke with a sound like green wood snapping. Blood everywhere. He tried to roll, tried to get leverage. Grace knew the ground, fighting the elders had taught her. She got her knee on his chest, her forearm across his throat, and for 3 seconds, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the question of whether she'd let him breathe again. Josiah was there before she could decide. He grabbed Wade by the collar, hauled him up. Wade's face was a mess of blood and dirt and shock. His eyes went wide when he saw Josiah's expression. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Wade choked out. "I know exactly," Josiah said. "I've met your kind before. I was your kind once." He shoved Wade back against the barn wall. Not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to make a point. Pike was crying, clutching his wounded leg where Grace's shot had grazed him. Cutler wasn't moving at all, the stillness of someone whose thread had been cut clean and fast. Grace stood breathing hard. Her habit was torn worse now, dirt ground into the fabric, blood on her hands that wasn't hers. The rosary was still wrapped around her wrist. "What do we do with him?" she asked. Josiah looked at Wade, at this man who thought power meant you could erase people when they became inconvenient, who thought a woman's no was just the start of negotiations, who killed priests and burned records and tied human beings in barns like they were problems to be solved later. "We don't kill him," Josiah said. Wade's eyes lit with something like hope. We do worse. The hope died. Grace understood first. A smile touched the corner of her mouth, not joy, something harder. You're thinking what I'm thinking. Probably. They tied Wade to the saddle of Cutler's horse. Not his own horse. That detail mattered somehow. Grace went inside and came back with paper and ink. She wrote carefully in the clear hand of someone who'd taught school for 7 years. The sign she hung around Wade's neck read, Wade Caldwell, son of Senator Robert Caldwell. Left a nun to die in a barn, forged church documents. Murdered Father Menendez. God sees what men hide. Below that in smaller letters, Habakkuk 2:12. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed. They walked him to town. 4 miles in afternoon heat, past every farm and ranch between the mission and the main street. Grace led the horse. Josiah walked beside Wade with the shotgun, not because Wade might run, but because dignity required a witness. People came out to watch, stood on porches, stopped their work. Children stared. Women crossed themselves. Men read the sign and their faces went hard. By the time they reached the courthouse, Wade was weeping. Not from pain, from the weight of being seen, of everyone knowing what he'd done and who he really was underneath the money and the name. The sheriff, a tired man named Norton, who'd been doing the job too long, read the sign twice. Looked at Grace. This true sister, every word, and I'll testify under oath. Norton nodded. I believe you will. He looked at Wade. You're under my custody until we sort this, and I'm sending telegrams to the diocese. If what she says is true, you'll hang. They left Wade tied to the hitching post with the land grant pinned to his chest. By evening, half the territory would know what he'd done. By morning, his father's political future would be as dead as Father Menendez. Justice in that part of the world didn't always wear a badge, but it wore a sign sometimes, and that was enough. Aftermath and warning. That night, neither of them slept much. Josiah sat on the porch with the shotgun across his knees, watching shadows that might be men or might be nothing. Grace stayed inside at first, then came out with 2 cups of tea made from plants she'd gathered. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that felt earned. Thank you, Grace said finally. For what? Not letting me kill him. You weren't going to. I wanted to. For 3 seconds, I wanted it more than I've wanted anything. But you didn't. That's what matters. Grace looked at the barn, its door still open to the night. Do places remember evil Mr. Flint? Josiah thought about Tombstone, about buildings that burned and ghosts that didn't. They do if we let them. Then tomorrow we change what it remembers. We make it a schoolhouse. They burned the ropes in a small fire out back. Grace said prayers over them, not for forgiveness, for release, for the part of her that had been tied there to understand it was free now. Then they left the barn doors open. No more secrets, no more darkness, just air moving through and light when morning came. Josiah was checking the fence line at dawn when he found it. A note nailed to the mission gate with a railroad spike. Old paper edges, burned writing done in what looked like charcoal. Josiah Flint. Formerly Josiah Flint Morrison. I remember Tombstone. I remember Lenora. I am coming. It was signed with 2 letters. S.R. Grace found him standing at the gate, staring at the note like it was a snake that had learned to write. What is it? He handed it to her without speaking. She read it twice. Who is S.R.? Josiah's face had gone the color of old paper. Someone who has every right to kill me. Tell me. I need to sit down first. They walked back to the porch. Josiah sat in the chair like his legs had stopped working right. Grace weighted the note in her hands, the morning sun making the charcoal words seem darker somehow. Finally, Josiah spoke. Tombstone, Arizona Territory, August of 1873. His voice sounded like it came from somewhere underground. A fire, a child, and the moment I learned what happens when you freeze instead of act. Who's Lenora? A girl, 12 years old, and I let her burn. Grace sat down slowly. She didn't interrupt. Didn't gasp. Just listened the way priests were supposed to listen, the way teachers listened when students confessed things they couldn't carry alone. Tell me, she said again, softer this time. And as the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down, Josiah began to tell the truth he had been running from for 3 years. The truth that was finally catching up, wearing the letters S.R. and a promise that sounded like thunder in the distance. The truth of fire. Josiah's hands shook when he lit his pipe. Not from age yet. He was only 45, but from the weight of what he was about to say, words he'd never spoken aloud to anyone, not even Sarah before she died, especially not Sarah. Grace sat across from him, the note with its charcoal letters resting on her lap. The morning sun made everything too bright, too sharp. He would have preferred darkness for this telling. Tombstone, he began, and the word tasted like ash. August of 73, 3 years ago. He drew on the pipe. The smoke helped somehow, gave his mouth something to do besides form the truth. I wasn't always a mountain man. Wasn't always alone. I rode with a crew. 6 men led by a man named Dutch Kramer. We weren't outlaws, not exactly. We were what rich men hired when they needed problems to disappear without lawyers getting involved. Grace didn't react, just listened. The job was Silver Moon Mine, labor dispute. 50 miners, mostly Irish and Polish, wanted $2 a day instead of $1.50. Mine owner man named Hollis Grant, he refused. Said if he paid them more, every mine in the territory would have to pay more, and that'd be the end of the silver boom. Josiah paused, watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting something he couldn't see. Grant hired Dutch's crew to keep the peace. That's what he called it, keeping the peace. What he meant was make sure the miners got scared enough to take what they were offered and be grateful for it. How many men in the crew, Grace asked. 6, Dutch Kramer running things. Me, a man named Cole who could track anything. 2 brothers, the Yates twins, who were good with their fists. And a kid younger than you named of Pine. He was there because his pa had ridden with Dutch years back and Dutch owed a debt. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down. We showed up at the mine on a Monday. Miners were already on strike, blocking the entrance with their bodies. Wives and children there too because they lived in barracks on site. Company housing. Wasn't much, but it beat sleeping in tents. Josiah's voice had gone flat, like he was reading from a report instead of confessing. Tuesday, nothing happened. We stood around looking threatening. Miners stood around looking determined. Wednesday, same thing. But Thursday, the heat broke everybody. 105 degrees. Dust everywhere. No shade. Tempers ran out before water did. He stopped. Grace waited. A miner threw a rock, hit one of the Yates brothers in the head. Drew blood. Dutch said that was it, time to end this. He told us to clear the barracks, use fire if we had to, make an example. The barracks where the families lived, Grace said quietly. 30 people inside. Women, children. The miners working the strike shift were outside, but their families were in there trying to stay cool. Josiah closed his eyes, could still see it clear as yesterday. Dutch and the Yates brothers, they circled to the front. Threw torches on the roof. Dry wood desert heat, it caught fast. Smoke first, then flames. People started screaming inside. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, continued. I was posted at the back door. My job was simple. Don't let anyone out. Dutch's orders. We make an example or we don't get paid. The hawk overhead screamed. Josiah flinched. The door flew open. A woman came out, carrying a child. Girl maybe 12 years old. Blonde hair, blue dress. The dress was already smoking. The woman's eyes found mine. He opened his eyes, looked at Grace. She said, please, just that. Please. And the girl, she reached out her hand toward me, called me mister, asked me to help. Grace's face was still, listening. I raised my rifle, finger on the trigger, told myself I was following orders, told myself if I let them pass, Dutch would shoot me, told myself a lot of things in the space of maybe 10 seconds. What did you do? Grace asked, though her tone said she already knew. Nothing. I stood there, didn't shoot them, didn't lower my rifle, didn't step aside, just froze like my body forgot how to move. He took a shaky breath. Dutch came around the corner, saw me standing there, saw the woman trying to get past. He shoved me aside, called me useless, shot the woman in the chest. She fell backward into the building. Still holding the girl, the door collapsed. They were both inside when it came down. Silence. Just wind and the distant sound of water moving over stones in the creek. 11 people died in that fire, 8 inside the barracks, 3 miners shot trying to help. The girl's name was Lenora Rook. Her mother was Catherine. Her father was Silas Rook, and he was underground when it happened. Came up to find his family gone. SR, Grace said. Silas Rook. He looked at me during the trial, didn't say a word, didn't have to. His eyes said everything. You were there, you could have helped, you didn't. There was a trial. Dutch got acquitted, bribed the judge. I testified, but only in writing. Didn't have the courage to show my face. Said I witnessed unlawful killings, but didn't name anyone specific. Didn't detail my own failure. Josiah knocked ash from his pipe. After the trial, I couldn't face Sarah. Told her I'd done something I couldn't take back. She said to make it right. I said I didn't know how. Changed my name from Morrison to just Flint. Ran to the mountains. Became what you see now. And Sarah died 6 months later. Consumption. I was there at the end. She said, stop running, Josiah. Stand still. Face it. His voice went rough. I bought this mission trying to stand still, trying to face something. But you can't face the past. It just follows you until it catches up. Grace was quiet for a long time. The sun moved. Shadows shifted. Finally, she spoke. Why didn't you step aside, fear? Of what death worse? Of choosing. If I did nothing, I could tell myself it wasn't my fault. If I acted, if I helped them, then I'd have to own it. Dutch would have killed me or kicked me out. I'd lose the pay I needed for Sarah's medicine. I'd have to live knowing I'd chosen wrong. But you chose nothing, and that's its own choice. I know. The opposite of good isn't evil, Mr. Flint. It's apathy. Josiah looked at her. You think I don't know that? I think you've been punishing yourself for 3 years instead of learning from it. Well, same thing. No, Grace said firmly. Punishment is backward-looking. Learning is forward-looking. You can't change Tombstone, but you can choose differently today. Silas won't see it that way. Probably not, but that's not really the question, is it? What is, can you forgive yourself? Josiah stared at the horizon. No. Then that's where we start. The watcher on the ridge, Silas Rook, appeared on the 12th day like a ghost that had learned patience. Grace was working the garden she'd started behind the house, coaxing plants that had no business growing in desert soil. Tomatoes, beans, herbs, things that needed water and hope in equal measure. She'd learned from the Paiute that you could grow almost anything if you understood what it needed and were willing to provide it. She felt the weight of being watched before she saw him. The sensation crawled up her spine, made her hands still on the hoe. She turned slowly, scanning the ridgeline to the north. There, a figure, tall and thin against the sky, maybe 300 yards out, just standing, not moving, not hiding, watching. Grace set down the hoe and walked quickly to the house. Josiah was inside cleaning his rifle with the kind of attention that meant he was thinking about things he didn't want to name. Someone's on the north ridge, she said. He stood without a word, grabbed the rifle, followed her outside. By the time they reached the garden, the figure was gone. But the feeling remained, like the air itself remembered being looked through. That's him, Josiah said. His voice was flat. You're sure, Barzum? I'm sure, Samir. Why doesn't he attack? Josiah scanned the ridge. Because killing me quick would be mercy. He wants me to feel what he felt. Helplessness, waiting, knowing something bad is coming and not being able to stop it. Grace studied his face. You're afraid. Yes. Good. Fear means you're paying attention. That afternoon, Josiah found the first sign. His coffee cup, the tin one he left on the porch rail each morning, was smashed. Not thrown, carefully crushed, folded in on itself like someone had taken time with it. Inside the wreckage, a note on paper so old it might have been made before the war. The note said Lenora was thirsty too, couldn't drink through smoke. Grace read it standing beside him. He's close enough to touch your things. Close enough to kill us if he wanted. But he doesn't want that, not yet. They searched the property, found nothing else disturbed, but the violation was complete. Someone had walked right up to the porch while they slept and destroyed something small just to prove he could. Day 14 brought worse. Josiah went to check on Abel, the gray mare he'd named after nothing in particular. Found her in the corral with a rope burn across her front leg. Not deep, not crippling, just enough to hurt to remind both horse and owner that nothing was safe. Tied to Abel's saddle was another note Catherine tried to ride away carrying Lenora. I couldn't catch them in time. Grace touched the rope burn, gently checking for infection. Abel flinched but tolerated it. He's telling you his story, making you feel it. I know. How long do we let this continue? Josiah looked at the hills at the 1,000 places a man could hide and watch. Until he's ready to finish it. Day 15. Grace's rosary disappeared from where she'd hung it to dry after washing. She noticed at evening prayers felt the absence like a missing tooth. They searched everywhere. Found nothing. The rosary returned before dawn, hung back on the same nail. But every bead had been rubbed with ash. The wood was stained dark, the cross blackened. It looked like something recovered from a fire. The note wrapped around it said, Father Menendez prayed while he burned. Did Lenora Grace held the rosary and didn't cry? Crying would give Silas what he wanted. Instead, she cleaned each bead carefully, methodically, whispering prayers over the ash that wouldn't quite come out. Josiah watched her work. He knows about Wade, knows about the priest. He's been watching longer than we thought. Grace, you should leave. Go to Santa Fe. Wait this out somewhere safe. She looked up from the rosary. We've had this conversation. That was before. Before what? Before I understood the stakes. She set down the rosary. I'm not leaving. Wade tried to make me disappear. Silas is trying to break you. I'm done running from men who think women and memories are things they can erase. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Because if he breaks you, this mission fails. The children have nowhere to go, and I'll have let another cruel man win by doing nothing. She paused. Sound familiar? Josiah had no answer for that. Day 17. The well water tasted wrong. Josiah drew a bucket and knew immediately. Smoke, not literal smoke, but the taste of charcoal like someone had dropped burned wood into the water source underground. They couldn't drink it, couldn't cook with it, had to ride 3 miles to the creek to fill barrels. It took all day. When they returned exhausted, they found the barn door nailed shut from the outside. 6 nails driven deep, sealing it closed. Grace stood looking at the door, and Josiah saw her hands shake. This was different. This was pointed. The barn where Wade had left her, now sealed shut like a tomb. He grabbed a crowbar and tore the door open. The nails screamed coming out. Inside, nothing was disturbed. But on the floor, scratched into the dust, a message. She couldn't open the door either. Grace turned and walked away. Didn't speak for the rest of the night. Josiah understood. There was a limit to how much symbolic torture a person could take before the symbols started feeling real again. That night, he sat on the porch with both rifles loaded and watched the darkness. Grace eventually came out with 2 cups of tea that had gone cold. This has to stop, she said. I know. He's not just hunting you, he's hunting what you care about. I don't care about anything. Grace gave him a look that said they both knew that was a lie. Let me go to town tomorrow, she said, and research. There has to be records about the trial, about Silas, about what happened after. It's not safe. Safer than waiting here for him to kill us slowly. Josiah couldn't argue with that. The investigation. Grace rode to town alone against Josiah's protests. She carried a rifle and the determination of someone who'd survived worse than a 4-mile ride. The sun was already hot when she reached the main street, dust hanging in the air like a question. The courthouse was 2 stories of territorial authority wood frame and whitewash American flag hanging limp in the still air. Grace tied her horse and went inside, where the cool was almost shocking after the heat. The clerk was a young man with ink stains on his fingers and the tired eyes of someone who'd read too many sad stories. He looked up when Grace entered, saw the habit, straightened his posture. Sister, he said, how can I help? I need to see trial records. Tombstone, Arizona territory. August of 73. Something changed in his face. Recognition, maybe. You're the nun. From the barn. Word traveled fast in small territories. I am. They say Wade Caldwell nearly killed you. He tried. The clerk nodded slowly. Tombstone. That was the labor fire. A lot of people died. 11. You know someone involved. Grace met his eyes. I'm trying to understand someone involved. The clerk studied her for a moment, then turned to the filing cabinets that lined the back wall. He worked with practiced efficiency, pulling folders, checking dates, cross-referencing. After 10 minutes, he returned with a stack of papers bound in string. Trial of Dutch Kramer and Associates. August 23, 73. Charges manslaughter, destruction of property, conspiracy. He set the stack on the counter. Ended in acquittal. Judge was later removed for corruption, but the verdict stood. Grace untied the string and started reading. The testimony was spare legal language, doing its best to drain emotion from horror. But between the lines, the story assembled itself. 50 miners striking for better pay. Mine owner Hollis Grant hiring Dutch Kramer's crew. Confrontation escalating over 4 days. Fire. Deaths. Screaming. A list of the dead. She found it on page 7. Catherine Rook, age 34. Lenora Rook, age 12. Patrick O'Malley, age 41. Sean O'Malley, age 38. The names continued, each one a life ended for the sin of wanting fair wages. She found the witness statements. Dutch Kramer testified that the fire was accidental, started by miners throwing torches. His crew had tried to help, but were driven back by smoke and heat. It was a tragedy, but not a crime. Other witnesses contradicted him, said they saw Kramer's men throwing torches deliberately, saw them blocking exits, heard orders to let it burn. One statement stood out. Written testimony from Josiah Flint Morrison. It was brief, clinical. I was present at Silver Moon Mine on the day in question. I witnessed events that resulted in deaths. The fire was started deliberately by parties unknown to me. I saw attempts to escape that were prevented. I cannot provide more specific testimony without endangering my own safety. Grace read it 3 times, saw what wasn't there. No names, no details about his own role, no admission of standing at the door while a child reached for help. Coward, she whispered. Ma'am, the clerk asked. Nothing. Is there more? He pulled another folder. Aftermath. Man named Silas Rook filed suit against Dutch Kramer Hollis Grant in the mining company. Wanted damages for wrongful death. Case dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Where's Silas Rook now? The clerk's face went carefully neutral. That's an interesting question. Meaning after the case was dismissed, Silas disappeared for about a year. Then Dutch Kramer was found hanged in Nevada. Murder ruled suicide, but nobody believed it. Year after that, one of the Yates brothers died. Fell off a cliff while drunk. Could have been an accident. Grace's chest tightened. Silas is hunting them. That's the rumor. Can't prove it. But funny how everyone connected to Tombstone keeps having bad luck. How many left from the crew? The clerk checked his papers. Dutch is dead. One Yates brother dead. The other disappeared, probably ran. Cole the tracker, nobody knows. Pine the kid, he went back east. That leaves your Mr. Flint. He's not my Mr. Flint. No. The clerk smiled slightly. Word in town is you two stood off Wade Caldwell together. Walked him through town like a criminal. That's the kind of thing people remember. Grace ignored that. Anything else about Silas? Just that he lost everything after the fire. Land, savings, spent 3 years tracking justice the law wouldn't give him. The clerk paused. I've got a daughter, sister. If someone burned her alive while another man watched and did nothing, I can't say I'd behave different than Silas. Revenge isn't justice. Maybe not, but it's something. Grace thanked him and left with copies of the trial records. Rode back to the mission with her mind working through what she'd learned. Silas wasn't just grieving. He was methodical, patient. He'd spent 3 years becoming the thing the law wouldn't be effective. When she told Josiah what she'd found, his face went gray. He's killed 2 already, Josiah said. Maybe they were accidents. You believe that? No. They sat with that knowledge as the sun dropped. Somewhere out there, Silas Rook was watching, waiting, deciding when the time was right to finish what Tombstone had started. The confrontation at the gate, day 19, came with unusual quiet. No signs, no messages, just silence that felt more threatening than the games had been. Josiah and Grace worked through the day, both of them jumping at shadows. They reinforced the doors, set up tin cans on strings that would rattle if anyone approached. Did all the things people did when they knew violence was coming, but not when or how. Dusk arrived like a held breath. The sky went orange and purple stars beginning to show through the color. Grace was inside making dinner when she heard Josiah's voice from the porch. Grace, come out here. The tone made her move fast. Silas Rook stood at the mission gate. He hadn't rung the bell, hadn't announced himself, just appeared like smoke taking shape in the growing dark. He was tall and thin the way grief makes people thin. Burn scars wrapped both forearms visible where his sleeves were rolled. Gray hair hung past his collar. His face was weathered leather and hard angles and eyes that had seen something break and never stopped seeing it. He wore no gun that Grace could see. His hands hung at his sides, empty and scarred. "Evening, Morrison," Silas said. His voice was surprisingly soft, like someone who'd spent years talking to ghosts and learned their volume. "Or do you go by Flint now?" Josiah stood on the porch, rifle in his hands, but not raised. "Say what you came to say." "I came to see if you still have a soul." Grace stepped out beside Josiah. Silas's eyes moved to her, studied her the way you might study an unexpected element in a familiar equation. "You must be the nun," Silas said. "Sister Grace. I know what happened with Wade Caldwell. Know he left you in that barn." Silas tilted his head slightly. "I stood over you 4 nights ago, while you slept, had a knife, thought about finishing what Caldwell started." Grace's breath caught, but she didn't move. "Why didn't you?" Josiah asked. "Because you cared about her, and I wanted you to feel what I felt. Helplessness, watching something die." Silas's voice stayed soft, but something underneath it was broken glass. "But when I stood there with the knees, she talked in her sleep. Prayed for you, Morrison. Prayed for your soul." "Grace," Josiah said quietly, "and I realized," Silas continued, "that killing her would make me like you. Someone who destroys innocent things because it's easier than facing the real target." Grace found her voice. "I'm not innocent. Compared to Lenora, everyone's innocent." The name hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. "I think about her every day," Josiah said. "Do you?" Silas took a step closer. "You think about her blonde hair catching fire, her blue dress burning while she reached for you." Another step. "You think about her calling you mister, asking you to help." "Yes." "You think about the sound she made when the door collapsed." Josiah's hands tightened on the rifle. "Every night." "Good." Silas stopped 10 feet from the porch. "Because I do too. Every single night for 3 years, I hear her screaming for me. Papa, Papa, Papa. And I couldn't reach her because mine guards held me back. Said I'd die too if I went in." His voice cracked for the first time. "But you could have reached her, Morrison. You were right there, one step. Lower your rifle, let them pass. That's all it would have taken." "I know." "Then why didn't you?" "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Choosing. Dutch would have killed me or thrown me out. I'd lose the money I needed. I'd have to own my choice." Josiah's voice was rough. "So I froze. Told myself doing nothing meant it wasn't my fault." "But it was your fault." "Yes." Silas stared at him. Grace could feel the weight of 3 years pressing down into this moment. All the hunting, all the watching, all the rage compressed into the space between these two men and the ghosts they carried. "I've killed 2 men from that crew," Silas said. "Dutch Kramer, Thomas Yates. Took me 3 years to find them. 3 years to balance the scales." "That's not balance," Grace said. "That's addition." Silas looked at her. "What would you know about it, sister?" "I know revenge doesn't bring anyone back. I know it just makes the pile of bodies higher." "Maybe, but it makes me feel something besides grief." "Does it?" Grace stepped down from the porch. Josiah reached for her but didn't stop her. "Or does it just give you something to do instead of healing?" She walked towards Silas, slowly, hands visible and empty. "I've lost people too, Mr. Rook. My father, my mother. 7 years of work building something good that Wade tried to destroy. I know what it feels like to want someone to pay." She stopped 5 feet from him. "But payment doesn't work the way we think it does. You kill Josiah, Lenora's still gone. You kill everyone from that crew, she's still gone. All you've done, fill your hands with more death." She was 12 years old. "I know. She wanted to be a teacher, like her mother." "I know. The last thing she said to me when, 'Papa, will you teach me to track butterflies?'" She loved butterflies. Grace felt tears on her face, but her voice stayed steady. "Then honor her. Teach other children to track butterflies. Build something instead of destroying." Silas looked at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten. "You think it's that simple?" "No, I think it's that hard." Silence. The desert wind moved between them. Finally, Silas spoke again, but this time to Josiah. Why'd she save you? What makes you worth saving? Josiah shook his head. Nothing. I don't deserve it. That's the first true thing you've said. Then kill me, if that's what you need. Silas pulled a knife from his belt, long blade scarred handle, the knife of someone who'd used it for 3 years of hunting. He turned it in his hand, watching light move on the steel. I want you to understand something, Morrison. I didn't come here to kill you. I came to see if you'd changed, if the man who froze at Tombstone would freeze again. And you saved her. Silas nodded toward Grace. When Wade left her, you acted, so maybe you learned something. He threw the knife. It stuck in the ground between them. But I'm not done with you yet, Silas said, because there's still one man left from that crew, one man who gave the orders, one man who's never paid a single consequence. Josiah went very still. Dutch Kramer is dead. Not him, the man who hired Dutch. The man who said, burn them out, make an example. The man whose money paid for my daughter's death. Hollis Grant. He's in Silver City now, running railroad security, living free while my family's ashes are in the ground. Silas's eyes burned in the failing light. And I need someone who was there, someone who will testify, someone who will help me hang him legal. Grace understood first. You want Josiah to testify. In person this time, not hiding behind a written statement, face to face in a courtroom, full truth about who gave orders and who followed them. And if I do, Josiah asked, then I walk away. You live with your guilt. I live with mine. And Grant swings for what he did. And if I don't, Silas picked up his knife, wiped the dust off the blade. Then I know you're still the same coward. And I'll kill you where you stand. Josiah looked at Grace. She nodded slightly. Not permission, acknowledgement. They both knew there was only one answer. I'll testify, Josiah said. I'll tell everything. What I did, what I didn't do, all of it. Silas studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. 3 days. Be ready to ride to Silver City. He turned and walked into the gathering dark. Within 10 steps, he'd vanished, leaving only the knife mark in the ground to prove he'd been real. Grace and Josiah stood in silence, watching the place where Silas had disappeared. Finally, Grace spoke. You're going to do this. I have to. It might not end the way you hope. I know, but it's time to stop running. That night, neither of them slept. They sat on the porch with rifles across their knees, drinking cold coffee and watching stars wheel overhead. Waiting for dawn. Waiting for whatever came next. At first light, Josiah went to check the horses, found Abel, the gray mare, alone in the corral. Silas's horse should have been visible somewhere on the property or the hills beyond, but there was nothing. Then he saw the blood. A trail of it leading north into the rocks. Fresh, still wet in places. Grace came running when she heard him shout. They followed the blood maybe 100 yards, found Silas's horse saddled but riderless. More blood on the saddle, a lot more. And a new note, this one not in charcoal, but in something that looked like dried blood. He's mine first. Catch me if you can. H. Hollis Grant, Grace whispered. He found Silas first. They looked at each other with the same realization. The hunting had shifted. Silas was wounded, maybe dying. Grant was out there somewhere with him. And if Silas died before testifying the truth about Tombstone, died with him. Josiah grabbed his rifle, started checking the load. Grace caught his arm. We go together, she said. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is, because if you go alone, you'll freeze again. But together, she met his eyes. Together, we don't freeze. We choose. Josiah looked at her, saw something in her face that reminded him of Sarah's last words. Stand still. Face it. Together, he agreed. They rode north into country that got rougher with every mile, following blood and hoof prints, and the trail of someone who wanted to be found. Behind them, the mission stood empty under the morning sun. Ahead, somewhere in the rocks and heat, Hollis Grant was waiting with a wounded man and 3 years of consequences he'd never paid. And for the first time in 3 years, Josiah Flint wasn't running. He was choosing. The hunt north, the blood trail, led them into country that looked like God had started to make something beautiful and then changed his mind halfway through. Red rock formations twisted up from the earth at angles that defied reason. Arroyos cut deep enough to hide wagons. Mesquite and juniper clung to stone faces where nothing should grow. The kind of terrain where a man could disappear 20 feet from you and you'd never know he was there. Josiah wrote a head reading sign. 3 years as a mountain man had taught him to see what most people missed. The way disturbed stones told a story. How blood on rock meant one thing and blood on sand meant another. The shape of hoof prints revealed speed, weight, desperation. Grace followed close rifle across her saddle, scanning the high ground the way the Paiute elders had taught her. Watch for movement. Watch for shapes that didn't match nature's patterns. Watch for the feeling in your chest that said eyes were on you. They both felt it, being watched. He knows we're coming, Grace said quietly. That's the point. He wants an audience. For whatever he's been planning since Tombstone. The blood was fresher now, still red instead of brown, still tacky instead of dried, which meant Silas was close and bleeding bad enough to leave a trail a child could follow. Either he was too weak to hide it, or Grant wanted them to follow and didn't care if Silas bled out along the way. They found the first sign of real trouble around noon, a place where the horse tracks stopped and human tracks started. Boot prints, 2 sets, one staggering uneven, one steady and deliberate. The blood increased here, pooling in low spots. Silas fell off his horse, Josiah said, kneeling to study the prints, or was pulled off. Grant's got him on foot now. Why, slower that way, easier to control and easier for us to catch up. He stood looking at the rock maze ahead. He wants us to find them. Grace studied the terrain, countless places for ambush, countless ways to die if you walked into the wrong canyon. This feels like a trap. It is. So we're walking into it anyway. You have a better idea. She didn't. They dismounted and went on foot, leading the horses, quieter that way, harder targets. The sun climbed higher and the heat became something physical, pressing down like a weight on the shoulders. Sweat soaked through their clothes. Dust coated their throats. The only sound was boots on stone and the occasional rattle of someone's canteen. They found Silas 3 hours later. He was sitting with his back against a boulder in a narrow canyon that barely qualified as a pass. His shirt was soaked dark with blood from a wound in his left shoulder. His face was gray. His breathing came shallow and quick. His eyes tracked them as they approached, but he didn't speak. Grace ran to him, already pulling medical supplies from the bag she'd brought. Josiah kept his rifle up, scanning the canyon walls, knowing this was exactly where someone would wait if they wanted clear shots at everyone. How bad? Grace asked, cutting away Silas's shirt. Bad enough. His voice was weak but steady. Bullet went through, missed the bone, but I've been bleeding for hours. She packed the wound with a cloth pressed hard to stop the flow. Silas grunted but didn't cry out. Where's Grant? Silas's eyes moved to the canyon rim. Up there, somewhere, watching. Josiah followed his gaze, saw nothing but rock and sky and heat shimmer. But the feeling of being watched intensified, crawled over his skin like spiders. Why didn't he finish you? Josiah asked. Because he's waiting for you. Silas coughed, winced. Wants us all together. Wants to settle all his debts at once. Grace worked quickly, stitching the wound with needle and thread from her kit. Her hands were steady despite the situation. 7 years at a mission teaching children meant she'd treated plenty of injuries. How did he find you? I got careless. After I left your place, I tracked him to a camp about 10 miles north. Thought I could get close while he slept. Silas grimaced as Grace pulled a stitch tight. He was waiting, shot me before I cleared the rocks. And brought you here. Said he had unfinished business. Said 3 years ago he paid men to do his dirty work, and look how that turned out. Time to handle it himself. Josiah's chest tightened. He knows I'm coming. Counted on it. Said you'd come because you couldn't live with one more person dying while you watched. Silas looked at him directly. Was he right? Yes. A voice echoed from somewhere above, bouncing off rock walls, so it was impossible to pinpoint the source. Touching? Really? The coward grows a conscience. Josiah spun rifle coming up. Saw nothing. 3 years, Morrison, or Flint, or whatever you call yourself now. The voice was cultured, educated. The voice of someone who'd learned to speak in boardrooms and ballrooms. 3 years I've been waiting for this moment. Show yourself, Grant. Laughter echoed. Why, so you can shoot me like you should have shot my crew at Tombstone. Oh, wait, you didn't shoot anyone at Tombstone. You just stood there. Grace finished with Silas and stood her own rifle ready. He's playing with us. I prefer to think of it as justice delayed. Grant's voice moved or seemed to. You see, Morrison, you cost me everything. That trial, the accusations. Even though I was never charged, the rumor stuck. Lost my mining interests. Lost my political connections. Had to rebuild from nothing. You killed 11 people, Josiah called out. I made a business decision that went poorly. There's a difference. Tell that to the families. I would, but most of them are dead now. Disease, poverty, the things that kill poor people when they don't have jobs. A pause. Jobs I would have provided if they just accepted their wages and been grateful. Silas tried to stand. Grace held him down. Save your strength. For what? Dying slower. But he stayed sitting, too weak to fight her. Grant's voice came again from a different angle. Here's what's going to happen. Morrison, you're going to walk out of that canyon alone, unarmed, and we're going to have a conversation about consequences. And if I don't, then I shoot the nun, then I shoot Silas, then I shoot you anyway. But at least this way, two of you might survive. Grace looked at Josiah. Don't. He'll kill you both regardless. Probably, but if you go out there alone, you'll freeze. You know you will. Josiah's hands tightened on the rifle. She was right. He could feel it already. The old fear rising, the voice in his head that said survival meant not choosing staying still, letting someone else decide. 3 years of running, 3 years of mountains and silence, and trying to bury the moment when he'd frozen at a barn door while a child burned. And here it was again, the same choice, the same test. I have to go, he said quietly, then I'm coming with you. Grace, he said, alone. I don't work for him. She checked her rifle, made sure it was loaded. Besides, you said it yourself. Together we don't freeze. We choose. Silas coughed, managed a weak smile. She's right, you know. Lenore would have liked her. Too stubborn for her own good. Josiah looked between them. These two people who should have nothing to do with each other. A nun who'd survived a barn and a father who'd lost everything to fire. Both of them broken in ways that didn't heal. Both of them somehow standing anyway. Together, he said finally. They helped Silas to his feet. He was weak but mobile. Grace supported him on one side. They moved toward the canyon mouth in a tight group, rifles ready, knowing they were walking into whatever Grant had planned, but doing it anyway because the alternative was standing still. And standing still had cost too much already. The ridge meeting, the canyon opened onto a mesa that stretched flat and empty for 200 yards before dropping off into nothing. Red rock, pale sky heat that made the air twist and shimmer. And standing in the middle of it all, a man. Hollis Grant looked nothing like Josiah remembered. 3 years had added weight and gray hair, and something hard around the eyes that came from falling and climbing back up. He wore expensive clothes that desert dust had made ordinary. His gun was holstered, but his hand rested near it. Comfortable. Ready. Morrison, Grant said as they emerged, you look older. You look richer. Hard work, determination, the qualities that built this country. Grant's eyes moved to Grace. And Sister Grace, the nun who refused to disappear. Wade Caldwell sends his regards from jail. Wade can rot, Grace said. He likely will, you made sure of that. Grant smiled. I respect it honestly. You had a problem. You solved it. That's more than Morrison here can say. Josiah kept his rifle low but ready. Let Silas go. Your fight's with me. My fight's with consequences. With people who think they can testify against men like me and walk away clean. Grant pulled his gun now. Didn't aim it, just held it. 3 years ago, you wrote a statement. Said I gave orders to burn people alive. Didn't stick in court, but it stuck other places. Lost me millions. You gave the orders. I made a decision to protect my investment. The miners refused to work. They were blocking my property. I hired professionals to remove them. Grant's face showed no emotion. If Dutch Kramer was too enthusiastic in his methods, that's on him, not me. Silas straightened despite the pain rage giving him strength. My wife, my daughter. You killed them. No, I never touched them. Dutch did that, and he paid for it. You paid him to do it. I paid him to solve a problem. How he solved it was his choice. Grace's voice cut through. You're splitting hairs over murdered children. I'm maintaining legal clarity, sister, something your church understands quite well when it comes to its own sins. Josiah took a step forward. Enough. You brought us here. Say what you need to say. Grant studied him. I brought you here to finish what should have ended at Tombstone. You testified against me once. You are planning to do it again. I can't allow that. So you'll kill us. Self-defense. 3 criminals came after me. Silas wanted for 2 murders. You fleeing justice. The nun accomplice to assault. I defended myself. Tragic but legal. Nobody will believe that. They will when they find your bodies and read the story I tell. Grant raised his gun, now aimed at Josiah. Should have frozen at Tombstone Morrison. Should have let Dutch do his job. But you wrote that statement, started this whole thing. So really everything that happens next is your fault. The moment stretched. Sun beating down, wind picking up dust. 4 people on a mesa with guns in history and nowhere to hide. Josiah's mind went back to Tombstone. The barn door, Lenora reaching, Catherine bleeding, the choice to stand still. And he felt it happening again. The freeze. The voice saying, don't move, don't choose, let someone else decide. But then Grace's hand touched his arm. Just for a second. A reminder. Together. We don't freeze together. No, Josiah said. Grant's finger tightened on the trigger. Know what? This isn't my fault. You're right that I should have acted at Tombstone. Should have stopped Dutch. Should have let Catherine and Lenora escape. Josiah's voice got stronger. But I didn't, and I've carried that for 3 years. It's taught me something. What's that? That standing still is its own choice, and I'm done making it. He threw his rifle to Silas. The movement was so unexpected that everyone froze for half a second. Silas caught the rifle on instinct. Grace stared. Grant's aim wavered, confused by the tactic. What are you doing? Grant demanded, giving Silas what he needs. Josiah kept his hands visible, empty. He's been hunting justice for 3 years. He's killed 2 men to get it, and he's been shot because of you. So here's the deal. You and him, face to face. However it ends, I won't stop it. You're insane. Maybe, but you wanted to finish Tombstone, finish it with the man who actually lost something. Not me. I lost my cowardice and my wife. Silas lost his family. If anyone gets to choose your ending, it's him. Grant's gun swung toward Silas. Put the rifle down. Silas stood there, wounded and bleeding, and holding a rifle that could end this in one shot. His hands shook. From blood loss or rage or both. He raised it slowly, aimed at Grant's chest. 3 years, Silas said. His voice was barely a whisper. 3 years I've dreamed of this. Then do it, Grant said. Pull the trigger. Become the killer you've been training to be. You deserve it. I deserve lots of things. Doesn't mean you can live with giving them to me. Silas's finger touched the trigger. Everyone waited. The mesa held its breath. Grace spoke quietly. Lenora's watching, Mr. Rook. Silas's hands trembled. Your daughter is watching. What do you want her to see? Her father becoming a murderer, or her father being better than the men who killed her? He deserves to die. Yes, he does. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. But not by your hand. Not like this. Because if you kill him here, you're just Grant with a different excuse. Just another man who thinks violence solves everything. Justice, Silas said. Justice is public. Justice has witnesses and trials and consequences that everyone sees. This is revenge, and revenge makes you like him. Silas's aim wavered. I can't. She's gone. 3 years and she's still gone. And killing him won't change that. No, but choosing not to changes you. The rifle lowered, inch by inch. Silas's face was wet with tears and sweat and pain. I wanted to. God forgive me, I wanted to. He already has, Grace said. Grant saw his chance. Raised his gun, again aimed at Silas's head. Stupid. Should have taken the shot when you had it. Josiah moved. Not fast, not heroic, just moved. Put himself between Grant's gun and Silas. Stood there with his back to the wounded man and his face toward the one who'd caused all this. The one who stood for every bad choice Josiah had ever made. Shoot me first, Josiah said. If you're going to do it, shoot me first. Grant's aim didn't waver. Get out of the way. No, I will shoot through you. Then do it. But know this, I'm not freezing this time. I'm not standing still and pretending it's not my choice. I'm choosing. Josiah's voice was steady. I'm choosing to stand between you and him. I'm choosing to face what I should have faced 3 years ago. And if that means I die here, at least I die standing. Grant's face twisted. You're not a hero, Morrison. You're just a coward having one good day. You're right, I am a coward. But I'm a coward who's learning. And that's more than you'll ever be. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Grace stepped up beside Josiah. Put herself in the line of fire too. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Silas, bleeding and weak, pushed himself up and stood with them. 3 people in a line. 3 people choosing to stand together against a man who'd built a life on other people's fear. Grant lowered his gun slowly. Not from mercy, from calculation. You think this changes anything? Yes, Josiah said, it changes everything. I'll find you again, all of you. Maybe, but not today. Grant backed towards his horse, keeping his gun visible, not turning his back. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Grace said, because we're taking you to Silver City, to the territorial marshal, and Josiah's going to testify everything, every detail, every order you gave. My word against his. Again. Didn't work 3 years ago. This time he's got Silas as witness. And me. And a nun's testimony carries weight. Grant's face went pale. You're bluffing. Try us. The standoff lasted another 10 seconds. Then Grant mounted his horse, looked down at them. You'll regret this, all of you. Already regret plenty, Silas said. What's one more arm? Grant rode off, fast at first, then slower when he realized they weren't chasing. By the time he disappeared into the rocks, the 3 people on the mesa had lowered their guns and were holding each other up because standing together was easier than standing alone. The long road to justice. They made camp at the canyon where they'd found Silas. Too dangerous to travel with him bleeding the way he was. Grace cleaned and rebandaged his wound properly while Josiah kept watch. Nobody spoke much. They were all too tired. Too wrung out from adrenaline and choice and the weight of not killing someone who deserved it. Night came cold the way desert nights did. They built a small fire and sat around it eating hardtack and jerky that tasted like dust. Above them, stars came out so thick you could almost hear them. Silas broke the silence first. Why'd you do that? Step in front of the gun. Josiah stared at the fire. Seemed like the right thing. Could have gotten you killed. Yeah, but standing still got 11 people killed at Tombstone. Figured it was time to try something different. You've changed. Not enough, not yet, but I'm trying. Silas nodded slowly. Lenora would have said that's enough. She was big on trying. Used to bring home injured birds, try to fix their wings. Most of them died anyway. But she kept trying because the trying mattered more than the success. Grace added wood to the fire. Tell us about her, if you can. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he started talking. Small memories. Lenora collecting butterflies in jars, always careful to let them go after she'd drawn them. Lenora helping her mother bake bread, getting flour everywhere. Lenora reading by lamplight, even though it hurt her eyes because books mattered more than comfort. She wanted to be a teacher, Silas said, like Catherine. Wanted to help children who couldn't read yet. Said every child deserved to know the world was bigger than what they could see. She sounds remarkable, Grace said. She was 12. Remarkable doesn't have an age requirement. They slept in shifts. Josiah took first watch, sat with his rifle and his thoughts, and the feeling that something had shifted today. Not healed. Healing would take years, but shifted. Like a bone setting after a break. Still painful, but aligned right for the first time. Morning came gray and slow. They broke camp early, helped Silas onto his horse, tied him into the saddle so he wouldn't fall if he passed out. Then they rode south towards Silver City 3 days away, if they pushed hard. They pushed hard. The country changed as they went. Red rock gave way to grassland. Grassland gave way to hills. By the second day, they could see mountains in the distance. By the third, they could see the smoke from Silver City's chimneys. The town was bigger than Josiah expected. 2,000 people, maybe. Rail stop, Marshal Station, federal courthouse. The kind of place where territorial justice got handled proper, when it got handled at all. They found the marshal's office on the main street. a wooden building with bars on the windows and a flagpole out front. The marshal was a man named William Cobb, 50 years old and tired, with the face of someone who'd seen enough evil to recognize it instantly. He listened to their story, all of it. Tombstone, the fire, Grant's orders, 3 years of running and hunting, and the consequences nobody paid. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and lit a cigar. "That's quite a tale," he said. "It's the truth," Grace said. "I believe you, sister. Question is whether a judge will. We've got 3 witnesses. We've got written testimony from the first trial. We've got proof Grant hired Dutch Kramer." Marshal Cobb nodded slowly. "And Grant's got lawyers, money, connections. This won't be easy." "Justice rarely is," Josiah said. "No, but it's possible." The marshal stood. "I'll send for Judge Hammond. He's honest, which is rare enough, and he's got no love for mining bosses who think they're above the law. If you can prove Grant gave orders, Hammond will hang him." "When?" Silas asked. "Week, maybe. Needs time to gather evidence, file charges, make sure everything's legal." Cobb looked at them. "You 3 prepared to stay testify in person. Look Grant in the face and tell a courtroom what you told me." Josiah felt the fear rise again. Public testimony, no hiding, everyone watching. But Grace's hand touched his shoulder. Silas nodded. They were together. "Yes," Josiah said. "We'll testify." The trial at the courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast. Mining baron on trial for murder. Witnesses who'd run and hunted and finally stopped to face justice. The kind of story that made newspapers fight for space and people fight for seats. Judge Hammond was a hard man with white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He opened the trial with a simple statement. "We're here to determine if Hollis Grant gave orders that resulted in 11 deaths at Silver Moon Mine. Evidence will be presented. Truth will be determined. Justice will be served." Grant sat at the defendant's table with 2 lawyers. He wore a suit that cost more than most people made in a year. His face showed nothing. No fear, no shame. Just the flat certainty of someone who'd bought his way out of worse. The prosecution called Josiah first. He walked to the stand, feeling every eye in the room on him. Swore on a Bible that his testimony would be truth. Sat down and looked at the judge. "State your name," the prosecutor said. "Josiah Flint, formerly Josiah Flint Morrison. And you were present at Silver Moon Mine on August 15th, 1873. "I was." "In what capacity?" "I was part of Dutch Kramer's crew. Hired security for Mr. Hollis Grant." The prosecutor led him through it. Every detail. The strike, the escalation, Grant's order to clear the barracks by any means. The fire, the deaths, Catherine and Lenore at the door. "And what did you do when you saw them?" the prosecutor asked. Josiah's throat went tight. The courtroom was silent. "Nothing. I stood there. I was supposed to keep them from escaping. So I raised my rifle and froze." "You didn't help them?" "No." "Why not?" "I was afraid of Dutch, afraid of losing my pay, afraid of having to choose." "And they died?" "Yes." Grant's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Young man, sharp eyes, the kind of lawyer money bought. "Mr. Flint, you testified in writing 3 years ago. Why didn't you include these details then?" "I was a coward." "Are you a coward now?" "Yes, but I'm a coward trying to do the right thing." "You've admitted to being at the scene of multiple deaths, to failing to act, to running afterward. Why should this court believe anything you say?" "Because I have nothing left to lose by telling the truth." The lawyer smiled. "Or everything to gain by lying." Josiah looked at him. "If I wanted to lie, I'd have left myself out of it. I'd have said I tried to help. I'd have made myself the hero, but I'm not a hero. I'm the man who stood still while a child burned. And I've lived with that for 3 years. That's not something you confess unless it's true." Silence. The lawyer had no response to that. Silas testified next, described finding his family, the years of hunting, the moment he realized revenge wouldn't bring them back, but justice might. Grace testified last, not about Tombstone, she'd never been there, but about character, about Josiah's change, about the choice to stand instead of freeze, about what it meant to face consequences instead of running from them. When she finished, Judge Hammond called for closing arguments. Grant's lawyer argued lack of direct evidence. No written order. No witnesses who heard Grant specifically say burn them alive. Just circumstantial proof of a man hiring security. The prosecutor argued pattern and payment. Grant hired Dutch. Grant paid Dutch. Grant's mind benefited from Dutch's methods. And 3 witnesses now testified to Grant's direct involvement. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, the foreman stood. We find Hollis Grant guilty of 11 counts of manslaughter, guilty of conspiracy to commit violence, guilty of obstructing justice. Grant's face showed nothing, just stared straight ahead like the verdict was happening to someone else. Judge Hammond looked at him. Hollis Grant, you're sentenced to 20 years territorial prison. Additionally, you'll pay restitution to the families of the deceased. Your assets will be seized to cover damages. He paused. You used your wealth to buy violence and your position to escape consequences. This court rejects that arithmetic. They took Grant out in chains. He looked at Josiah as he passed. This doesn't make you clean. I know, Josiah said, but it makes you accountable. That's enough. Outside the courthouse, the 3 of them stood in the afternoon sun that felt different somehow, lighter. It's done, Silas said. It's done, Josiah agreed. Grace looked at them both. What now? Silas thought about it. I've got nowhere to go. Spent 3 years hunting. Don't know how to do anything else. The mission needs help, Grace said. We're rebuilding, teaching children. Could use someone who knows tracking, survival, honest work. I'm not a teacher. Neither was I until I tried. Silas smiled, actually smiled. First time Josiah had seen it. Lenora would like that, helping children. Then come home with us. Home, Silas repeated, testing the word. Yeah, all right. Return to the mission. They rode back together. 3 people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago. 3 people bound now by fire and choice, and the understanding that healing wasn't linear, but it was possible. The mission looked different when they arrived. Maybe it was them who'd changed. Maybe it was both. But the barn that had held Grace now stood with door wide open, sunlight streaming through. The chapel was still ruined, but someone, probably local families, had started clearing debris. Children were waiting. The Paiute kids who'd scattered when Wade came. They'd heard Grace was back, heard the mission was safe again. They came running when they saw her. She dismounted and they surrounded her, talking all at once, asking where she'd been, telling her what they'd learned while she was gone. She knelt among them and answered every question with patience that came from genuine love. Josiah and Silas hung back watching. She's good with them, Silas said. She's good with broken things, knows how to fix them without pretending they were never broken. That include us. Probably. Over the next months, they built something. Not perfect, not healed completely, but something. Josiah taught carpentry, rebuilt the chapel properly, added a bell tower. The children helped learning how to measure and cut and make things that would last. Silas taught survival, how to track water, which plants healed, how to read weather and seasons, the practical wisdom that kept people alive in hard country. The children called him Uncle Silas. He didn't cry when they said it, but it was close. Grace taught everything else. Reading, writing, Spanish, and English. The kind of education that opened doors and made children believe the world was bigger than one mission in the desert. The barn became a schoolhouse. They put benches inside, a chalkboard on one wall, books donated by families in town who'd heard what happened and wanted to help. One evening, 6 months after the trial, Josiah stood in the doorway of what used to be the place Grace nearly died. Now it was full of children's laughter and the sound of chalk on slate and the particular noise of people learning things they didn't know before. Grace came and stood beside him. Do places remember evil? They do, but they can remember good too if you give them the chance. We gave it a chance. We did. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question she'd been holding. What happens when the children ask about Tombstone, about what you did? I tell them the truth, that I made a choice I can't take back, that I'm trying to make better choices now, that mistakes don't define you unless you let them. Will that be enough? I don't know, but it's honest. Grace nodded. Lenora would approve. Silas says she was big on honesty. She was 12. Wisdom doesn't have an age requirement. They stood together watching children learn in the space where Grace had once thought she'd die. And Josiah thought about how the world turned on small choices, how standing still was its own decision, how the opposite of evil wasn't heroism, but simply acting when action was needed. He thought about Lenora reaching, about Catherine bleeding, about 3 years running, about finally stopping. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, Sarah had been right. Sometimes you had to stand still, not freeze, but stop running and face the thing you'd been avoiding. Stand still long enough to choose forward instead of away. Thank you, he said quietly. Grace looked at him. For what? For not letting me run, for standing with me, for showing me that together is stronger than alone. You'd have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but probably not in time. She smiled. Then we're even. You saved me from a barn. I saved you from yourself. That's what community does. Is that what this is? Community. It's family. Which is better? Frame closing, Montana. 1913. Old Josiah opened his eyes. The story was done. The sun had set while he talked. Stars were coming out above Montana. His grandson Caleb sat motionless on the porch step, completely absorbed in what he'd heard. That's the story, Josiah said. His voice was rough from talking so long. That's Tombstone. That's Sister Grace. That's who your great-grandfather was when he finally stopped running. Caleb was quiet for a long time, then asked, Sister Grace and Mr. Rook, what happened to them? Grace died in '05. Pneumonia, peaceful, surrounded by students who'd become teachers themselves, buried at the mission next to the chapel we rebuilt. Josiah's voice softened. Silas died in '08, in his sleep after teaching tracking class. His last words were about Lenora. Said he hoped she'd be proud. And you? I lived, built the mission into something that mattered, taught children for 30 years, watched them grow up and have children of their own. Some of them are judges now, doctors, teachers. He paused. Lenora wanted children to know the world was bigger than what they could see. We helped with that. Did you ever forgive yourself? No, not completely, but I learned to live with what I'd done. Learned that carrying guilt and letting it crush you are different things. Caleb looked at the Yale acceptance letter sitting on the table beside him. So what do I do about the choice I'm facing? I can't tell you. I know, but you want me to know something. That's why you told the story. Josiah nodded. I want you to know that freezing is a choice. That standing still because you're afraid to choose is still choosing. And that whatever you decide, you'll have to live with it. What if I choose wrong? Then you choose again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until you get it right. He leaned forward. Redemption isn't a moment. It's a direction. You keep choosing better until better becomes who you are. But how do I know what's better? You don't, not always. But you can know this. Are you choosing because you're afraid or because you believe it's right? Are you running from something or standing for something? Josiah's voice got quiet. Those questions matter more than the answer you give. Caleb stood, walked to the porch rail, looked out at the same Montana horizon his grandfather had stared at for decades. If you could go back to Tombstone, knowing what you know now, what would you do different? Everything. I'd step aside, let Catherine and Lenora escape, face Dutch's gun, take the bullet if I had to, but I'd act. You'd die. Maybe, or maybe Dutch would respect the stand. Or maybe I'd survive and testify immediately. Or maybe I'd die and someone else would act because I showed them how. He paused. Point is, I'd choose action over paralysis. I'd choose standing over freezing, even if it killed you. Especially then, because Lenora got no choice. She reached for help and found none. The least I could do was be worth reaching for. Silence. Wind through grass. Somewhere an owl called. I think, Caleb said slowly, I need to decide for myself. But I'm grateful you told me, grateful you trusted me with your worst moment. It's not my worst moment anymore. My worst moment was the 3 years after when I ran instead of facing it. Tombstone was just the beginning. The running was the real failure. And coming back, that was the redemption. No, coming back was just stopping the running. The redemption was 30 years of choosing differently, every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Caleb turned. Did Grace ever say if she forgave you? Josiah smiled. She said forgiveness wasn't hers to give. It was God's job, but she said she could offer grace, which was enough. Was it? It was everything. The old man and the young one stood together on the porch, 2 generations, different choices ahead. Same human tendency to freeze when choosing was required. Finally, Caleb spoke. I'm going to think about this. Really think. Not just react. Good. And whatever I choose, I'll own it. No running. Better. Caleb picked up his trunk, carried it back inside. The Yale letter stayed on the table. He'd decide tomorrow, or the next day, but he'd decide honest, with eyes open, knowing that paralysis was its own answer, and usually the wrong one. Josiah sat alone on the porch as full dark came. He thought about Grace, about Silas, about Lenora and Catherine, and all the people whose names he'd carved on the memorial stone at the mission. He thought about choices and consequences and the long road from coward to something marginally better. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, Sarah would be proud, that he'd finally stood still long enough to become the man she'd believed he could be. Not a hero, never a hero, just a coward who'd learned painfully and slowly to choose action over paralysis, to choose standing over freezing, to choose forward over away. And if his grandson learned that lesson easier, learned it sooner, learned it without 3 years in the mountains and 11 ghosts following him everywhere. Well, that was inheritance worth leaving. The stars turned overhead, the wind kept blowing, and somewhere in the distance a bell rang. Maybe real, maybe memory, maybe both. But Josiah heard it clear. The sound of a mission where broken things learned to heal, where children learned that the world was bigger than what they could see, where a coward learned that choosing was harder than freezing, but infinitely more human. He closed his eyes and smiled. The story was told. The lesson was given. The choice was Caleb's now, and that Josiah thought was exactly how it should be.